Today, using a computer feels effortless. You click an icon, you open an app, everything just works. But rewind to the early 1990s, and computers were a completely different world. There were no start menus, no taskbars, no simple desktop icons. Instead, users were greeted by a blinking cursor on a black screen, waiting for them to type mysterious commands just to open a program. The operating system powering most personal computers at the time was MS-DOS. To many people today, it would look like something from a science fiction movie. Before the release of Windows 95, using a computer required patience, memorization, and sometimes a bit of luck. From floppy disks and command lines to noisy dial-up connections and early PC gaming, life before Windows 95 was a fascinating era that shaped modern computing. Let's travel back to a time when computers were powerful, but definitely not user-friendly. Computers before the graphical revolution. Before graphical operating systems became standard, computers didn't look anything like they do today. There were no colorful icons, windows, or mouse-driven menus. Most personal computers booted directly into a text-based interface. Instead of clicking, users had to type commands to tell the computer what to do. Even simple tasks like opening a file or launching a program required specific instructions. For many people, this made computers feel intimidating. They weren't designed for casual users. They were tools, mostly used by programmers, engineers, and businesses that had the technical knowledge to operate them. The graphical revolution that arrived in the mid-1990s would change this forever. But before that moment, computing was a world dominated by text, commands, and technical expertise. Life with MS-DOS commands. For most PC users before Windows 95, everyday computing happened inside MS-DOS. The screen was simple, a black background with a blinking prompt. To open a program, you needed to know the exact command. For example, typing dir showed a list of files. Typing cd allowed you to change directories. Typing the name of a program launched it. If you forgot the command or typed it incorrectly, the computer simply refused to cooperate. Many users kept cheat sheets taped to their desks just to remember important commands. Learning DOS felt more like learning a new language than using a computer. And yet, millions of people relied on it every day. Floppy disks and data storage struggles. Before USB drives and cloud storage, data lived on floppy disks. These thin plastic squares stored files, programs, and games. But they had one major limitation: very little storage space. Early floppy disks held about 1.44 megabytes. To put that into perspective, a single modern smartphone photo can easily be larger than that. Installing a large program often required multiple floppy disks. Users had to insert them one by one as the computer requested the next disk. And floppy disks were fragile. Magnets, heat, or dust could destroy them. Losing a floppy disk often meant losing everything stored on it. Despite their limitations, floppy disks were the backbone of personal computing for years. Slow and noisy dial-up internet connections. Connecting to the internet in the early 1990s was a completely different experience. Most households used dial-up internet, which connected through the same telephone line used for calls. When the modem connected, it produced a series of strange electronic sounds: beeping, buzzing, screeching. Those noises meant the computer was negotiating a connection with another modem somewhere else. And once connected, the internet was incredibly slow. Loading a single web page could take minutes. Downloading a small file might take an hour. Even worse, if someone in the house picked up the phone, the internet connection would instantly disconnect. Despite the frustration, dial-up internet introduced millions of people to the online world for the first time. Early personal computers in homes. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, personal computers slowly began appearing in homes. These machines were bulky and expensive. Typical family computers often came from companies like IBM, Compaq, or Dell. Most households used them for a few basic tasks: word processing, educational software, simple games. Many parents believed computers would help their children succeed in school. But the learning curve was steep. Families often had to rely on manuals or computer-savvy friends just to figure out how everything worked. Still, these early home PCs laid the foundation for the personal computing revolution that would follow. The rise of IBM-compatible PCs. In the early days of PCs was gone 2 minutes problem from the rise of IBM-compatible PCs. In the early days of businesses of city, they would considered for more personal computers learning to them. The rise of IBM-compatible PCs. In the early days of businesses of city, that would considered for more personal computers learning to them, in 57%, 2012. IBM played a massive role in shaping the PC industry. IBM introduced its personal computer in 1981, and its design quickly became the industry standard. Other companies began producing IBM-compatible PCs, machines that could run the same software and operating systems. Manufacturers like Compaq and Dell built systems that followed IBM's architecture. This compatibility allowed software developers to create programs that worked across many different computers. The result was a rapidly growing PC market that made computers more accessible to businesses and households alike. Using command-line programs and software. Before graphical interfaces became standard, most software programs were launched through command lines. Users had to navigate through directories to locate the program they wanted to run. Then they typed the program's file name and pressed enter. There were no visual menus or icons to guide them. Everything depended on remembering file names and locations. Mistakes were common. Typing errors could lead to confusing error messages or failed program launches. Despite the challenges, millions of people became comfortable working in this command-driven environment. It was a technical world, but one that built the foundation for modern software development. The challenge of installing programs. Installing software before Windows 95 could feel like solving a puzzle. Programs rarely came with automated installers. Instead, users had to manually copy files, configure settings, and sometimes edit system files. Many programs also required adjusting memory settings in DOS to run properly. If the configuration was wrong, the program simply wouldn't start. Even experienced users sometimes spent hours troubleshooting installation issues. For beginners, it could be overwhelming. The idea of plug-and-play computing simply didn't exist yet. Gaming before modern operating systems. PC gaming existed long before modern operating systems. Many classic games ran directly in DOS. Players launched them by typing commands and adjusting system settings to ensure the game worked correctly. Sound cards, graphics settings, and memory configurations often had to be adjusted manually. Popular games from the era included titles like Doom and Prince of Persia. These games pushed the limits of early PCs and helped establish the PC as a powerful gaming platform. Despite technical challenges, PC gaming developed a passionate community that continues today. Office work on early computer systems. Before graphical operating systems became widespread, office work relied on text-based programs. Word processing software allowed employees to create documents more efficiently than typewriters. Spreadsheets helped businesses organize financial data. One of the most popular spreadsheet programs of the era was Lotus 123. These tools revolutionized office productivity, even without modern graphical interfaces. However, they required users to memorize keyboard shortcuts and commands instead of using a mouse. For many office workers, learning computer software became an essential skill during the transition into the digital age. Computer viruses and early security problems. Long before modern antivirus software and cybersecurity systems, early PC users were already facing a new digital threat: computer viruses. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, viruses spread primarily through floppy disks. If a disk carried an infected file, the virus could quietly copy itself onto the computer's system files. One of the earliest widely known viruses was brain virus, which infected floppy disk boot sectors. Another infamous early virus was Michelangelo virus, which gained global attention because it could potentially erase hard drives on a specific date. Back then, security tools were limited. Antivirus programs existed, but they were basic compared to modern solutions. Many users didn't even realize their computer had been infected until files began disappearing or programs stopped working. The concept of digital security was still new, and the early virus outbreaks forced the industry to begin taking cybersecurity seriously. Early networking and file sharing. Before cloud storage and instant file sharing, connecting computers together was complicated. Early networking often required special cables, network cards, and complex configuration settings. Businesses began using local area networks, or LANs, to allow computers within the same office to share files and printers. But setting up a network in the DOS era wasn't simple. Users had to configure network drivers and software manually, often through text-based settings. At the same time, bulletin board systems, or BBS networks, allowed people to dial into computers over telephone lines to download files, share messages, and exchange software. These early online communities helped shape the foundations of modern internet culture. Printers, drivers, and hardware confusion. Connecting hardware to a computer before Windows 95 could be frustrating. Printers, scanners, and other devices required special software called drivers to communicate with the operating system. But installing these drivers was rarely automatic. Users had to configure them manually through DOS commands or configuration files. Sometimes, the wrong driver could cause the printer to output pages filled with random symbols instead of text. Different hardware brands often required completely different setups, making compatibility a constant challenge. The lack of plug-and-play technology meant that adding a new device could easily turn into a lengthy troubleshooting session. Learning computers without the internet. Today, if you don't know how to do something on a computer, you simply search online. But before widespread internet access, learning computer skills was much harder. Users relied on thick instruction manuals, computer magazines, advice from friends or coworkers. Books often included step-by-step guides for using programs or learning DOS commands. Some people even attended computer classes just to understand the basics of personal computing. Without instant online tutorials, mastering a computer required patience, experimentation, and a willingness to learn through trial and error. Early multimedia and CD-ROM technology. In the early 1990s, a new technology began transforming personal computers: the CD-ROM. Unlike floppy disks, which stored only a small amount of data, CD-ROMs could hold hundreds of megabytes. This made them ideal for multimedia programs that included images, sound, and video. Educational software, encyclopedias, and interactive games suddenly became far more sophisticated. One of the most famous examples was Microsoft Encarta, which allowed users to explore a massive encyclopedia directly on their computer. CD-ROM technology helped push PCs beyond simple text-based tasks and into the world of multimedia experiences. Competing operating systems. Before Windows 95. Before Windows 95 dominated personal computing, several operating systems competed for attention. While DOS-powered PCs were widespread, other systems offered different approaches. For example, Mac OS introduced a graphical interface years earlier on Apple computers. Meanwhile, more technical users experimented with systems like Linux, which began emerging in the early 1990s. Each system had its own advantages, but compatibility issues often limited their adoption. The industry was still searching for a universal operating system that could combine power with simplicity. Computer troubleshooting in the DOS era. Fixing computer problems in the DOS era often felt like detective work. When something went wrong, error messages were usually vague or confusing. Users had to investigate configuration files like autoexec.bat and config.sys, searching for settings that might be causing conflicts. Hardware conflicts were common, especially when multiple devices tried to use the same system resources. Sometimes, the solution required manually editing lines of code in configuration files. For many users, troubleshooting a PC became an essential skill, but it could also be incredibly frustrating. Even experienced users sometimes spent hours trying to fix a single problem. The growing demand for user-friendly computers. By the early 1990s, computers were becoming more common in homes and offices. But there was one major problem. Most systems were still too complicated for average users. People wanted computers that were easy to understand, machines that didn't require memorizing commands or editing system files. This demand pushed software companies to rethink how operating systems worked. Graphical interfaces, icons, and mouse-based navigation began gaining popularity. Users wanted simplicity. They wanted computers that worked more like everyday appliances rather than technical machines. And that demand set the stage for one of the most important software launches in history. The hype and anticipation for Windows 95. By the mid-1990s, anticipation was building for a new operating system from Microsoft. That operating system was Windows 95. Microsoft promoted it as a revolutionary step forward in personal computing. The system promised features that would make computers easier to use than ever before. These included the Start menu, a taskbar for running programs, built-in support for plug-and-play hardware, a more user-friendly graphical interface. The marketing campaign was massive. Stores held midnight launch events, and advertisements appeared across television and magazines. For many people, Windows 95 represented the future of computing. How Windows 95 changed personal computing forever. When Windows 95 finally launched in 1995, it transformed the personal computer industry almost overnight. For the first time, millions of users could navigate their computers using icons, menus, and a mouse. Tasks that once required complex DOS commands could now be completed with a few clicks. Windows 95 also introduced improved hardware compatibility, making it easier to install new devices without complicated configuration. The operating system quickly became one of the most successful software releases in history. More importantly, it made personal computers accessible to everyday users around the world. The age of command-line computing was finally fading away. Remembering the pre-Windows 95 era. Looking back today, life before Windows 95 might seem primitive. Computers were slower, software was harder to install, and simple tasks often required technical knowledge that modern users rarely need. But those early years of personal computing were also incredibly important. They laid the foundation for everything we use today, from modern operating systems to the internet and digital communication. The DOS era taught an entire generation how computers truly worked. And when Windows 95 arrived, it didn't just introduce new features, it opened the door to the modern computing world. A world where anyone, not just experts, could sit down at a computer and begin exploring the digital age. And that transformation would change technology forever.